Puyo Puyo 4 is the fourth title of the main Puyo series. It's only been available in Japanese since it released in 1999, but that didn't stop me from playing it. You see, since my last video, I've actually been hardcore studying how to read Japanese in order to play this game. That was a bold-faced lie, though that probably would have been a better use of my time than whatever I ended up doing the last year. If you're actually interested in playing this game in English, Precise Museum has made it possible to patch the game so that you can play the Dreamcast version of it. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested in that. Anyways, let's talk about Puyo Puyo 4. Puyo 4 was the last Puyo game compile ever released, though technically not the last they ever developed. Puyo Puyo Box was the last game that they developed. Back to Puyo 4 though. Did you know there are 4 versions of Puyo 4? Wow, 4 Puyos, 4 players, 4 everything. This is the most 4 Puyo a Puyo will ever 4. Excuse me for that. Now right off the bat, I'm just gonna say I've only experienced the Dreamcast version of Puyo 4 and the Pocket version. However, I do take it upon myself whenever I play a game to take a look into other ports of it to see how they compare. What I found was that, putting this one aside, there are quite a few differences between the console versions of these games that make each one just a bit more unique than the other one. The Dreamcast and the PlayStation version, for example, have voice cutscenes. However, the PlayStation version only supports 2 players, while the Dreamcast and N64 version both support 4 players. Yeah, it's just a bunch of small differences like that, but there's a lot more that you can go into. For instance, there's the Nintendo 64 version. You see, one of the main things you may notice if you play the N64 version is its music. It sounds different. It doesn't just sound different though, it sounds better. To put it bluntly, the N64 is simply an inferior console to the other two. Now, I don't mean to insult the quality of the games on this console. I genuinely adore this console and it's one of the first I ever owned, and I practically grew up on it. However, it comes down to the way that the N64 had to store its music. The N64's music was sequenced, not streamed. Due to that and the combination of its space limitations, that ultimately meant that it was gonna end up sounding more compressed. Here, you can even listen for yourself. So the N64 version has technically inferior music and no voiced cutscenes. So what does it have going for it? Well, there is a reason that this version of the game is called Puyo Puyo 4 Party. That's because this game had an extra mode called Bomb Puyo. It's a party mode where 4 players play a normal game of Puyo while somebody's screen has a Bomb Puyo on it. The player will have to remove the bomb by popping a few Puyos, after which it will move on to another player. While this is happening, a timer at the top is counting down, and whoever ends up with the Puyo last loses. So it's basically hot potato. It's Puyo hot potato. And I'm gonna be honest guys, I don't think anyone's screaming out into the sky cursing about the fact that their version of Puyo 4 didn't come with an extra Puyo bomb side mode. I mean, it's a cool addition at the time, but we have so many great side modes at this point that this one doesn't really feel like anything that special. I also feel like this mode would simply be better if the timer were faster, and instead of just one person dying, it eliminated players one by one, instead of the game just ending as soon as one guy loses. It's meant to be treated like a party game. Where's the fun if it's just one guy being singled out? It's gonna feel extremely unfair if you lose because you were the one unlucky guy who got stuck with the Puyo bomb. The last thing I have to mention about the N64 version of the game is the transfer pack. Yes, that's right everybody. Dust off your old transfer packs because you finally have a reason to use it again. Everyone knows that the transfer pack is the coolest device to spend even more money on for your console. By taking your transfer pack and inserting a compatible cartridge into it and onto your Nintendo 64 controller, you get a special in-game bonus. It's like DLC before DLC. No, like seriously, this shit is actually legitimately cool. I remember even playing the OG Pokemon games on my TV because the transfer pack just straight up lets you do that if you had Pokemon Stadium. With such a unique and interesting device, let's see what Puyo Puyo 4 decided to do with its use of the transfer pack. That's right folks, by inserting your copy of Pocket Puyo Puyo Sun to the transfer pack and to your Nintendo 64, you get... The only thing you really get is an illustration gallery of the funny little pictures in Pocket Puyo Sun. As far as the transfer pack bonus goes, I have to admit that while the cards are cute and some of them are genuinely cool, it's a bit underwhelming. The transfer pack has the potential to be used for some pretty neat stuff. I already mentioned how you could use it in Pokemon Stadium, but games like Mario Golf let you transfer characters from the GBC version of the game into the N64 version, which is really cool, and basically every other game that supported the transfer pack did something similar. It either allowed you to transfer characters, items, or in some cases enhance your gameplay. I wish more could have been done with it, but I do like the illustrations and I'm glad they weren't lost forever. Speaking of illustrations, I guess one last thing I could mention about this version is its art. Many of the promotional artwork for each version of the game has different art styles. There are at least 4 styles at play here among the 4 versions, all coming from various different artists pitching in their own interpretations of the characters. And many more than that when you take into account the animations and cutscenes and such. The N64 as well as the Game Boy Color versions are way more distinct from the other two. The PS1 and Dreamcast versions, for instance, have quite a few differences among them, however they're more in line with what is actually portrayed in the game. Puyo 4 Parties, however, features much more cutesy art in its presentation. Just by looking at its box art, you can tell that it's much more reminiscent of the older Puyo art styles than the more serious look Puyo 4 was going for. It's so different that I wouldn't even blame you for thinking this is an entirely different game just by looking at the box cover from the other twos. Well, then again, every version of the game has a unique box cover. The Dreamcast version, being the original, has just some of the most beautiful Puyo artwork you'll ever see. I love how this illustration just feels as it's flaunting itself, presenting Puyo's new look to the viewer, but it doesn't shy away from showing off its cute side either. It's spectacular. 10 out of 10. Then of course you have the Game Boy Colors version, which has the cutest style of all. I quite like it. You can tell that its chibi style is more purposely done for the sake of replicating the game's art style, as well as the fact that it is indeed a shrunken down version of Puyo 4. Also, this is the only version of the game that just straight up flaunts Doppelganger Aurel, and on the cover no less. Well, we'll have more time to talk about her later on. For now though, I have to say I actually really like the way she's positioned here. Appearing out of the corner of Aurel's face, grinning as she replicates the same pose as her, it's really well done. Lastly, we have the PlayStation's version. This one doesn't actually feature any characters at all except Carbuncle. The art for this cover takes a realism approach, with Carbuncle as a piece of embroidered felt and stuck into a jean pocket. It's really nicely done and it gives the version of the game a clean look. Ironically though, the one called Pocket Puyo 4 isn't the one with the pocket in its cover, it's the home console version. Though there is a reason for that. Since we're on the topic of the PS1 version of the game, let's go ahead and talk about that one real quick. The PlayStation version, unlike the N64 and Dreamcast version, only offers 2-player instead of 4 players. So what does this version of Puyo 4 do to compensate that grave sin? Well, there is this game's Curry Story mode. Curry Story is a cute little side mode where Aurel gathers ingredients for curry by battling her friends, and it concludes with Aurel making curry for her and Carbuncle. You also have to do it if you want to unlock Carbuncle as a playable character in this version. Also, the final curry Aurel ends up making is actually determined by your performance in the battles, whether you win or lose or how you played. Since Puyo 4 on the N64 had the Bomb Party side mode, it earned the title of Puyo Puyo 4 Party. And the PlayStation version has something similar going on. This game was compatible with the Pocket Station, and within that Pocket Station, you got a pet Carbuncle to be your friend. So that's why he's in the pocket. And it's also the reason why this version is called Puyo 4 together with Carby. Quite honestly, I think this blows the N64's transfer pack out of the water. Some measly little playing cards? Screw that, I want a pet Carbuncle. The Dreamcast offers something that's similar but not the same. Instead of Carbuncle appearing on the field, he appears on the VMU where he performs various amounts of actions. Look, Arl, Carbuncle isn't missing. He's been here the whole time. Honestly, if the Dreamcast version happened to have Curry's story and gave its own bonus content like, I don't know, Chow Garden but Carbuncle edition, then it'd probably be the best version of the game. Speaking of which, I guess it's about time we talk about that version. To put it simply, it's the most vanilla version of the game, which makes sense as it's the first version of the game to release. This game, just like the others, features an endless Puyo mode, and you get to pick from normal Puyo, big Puyo, or small Puyo. It's just normal Puyo popping, except it never ends unless you reach the top of the screen. However, the Dreamcast version did have an extra mode called Extra Mini Puyo. The board in this version is actually so small that it makes it possible to create a 100 chain, which as far as I'm aware is the largest chain possible within the Puyo series. It also has a mission mode where the game basically presents you several challenges like popping a certain amount of Puyos or making chains. The difficulty of the missions of course depend on the difficulty you choose. And that's about it. As far as differences go, I feel like I've laid out all the major ones. As far as the home console versions are concerned, that is. That's right folks, I saved Pocket Puyo 4 for last. And you might think that since it's on an inferior console, that it must be the most bare bone version of the game. But you couldn't be more wrong. Just by virtue of it being on a Game Boy Color means that it will not be like either of the console versions of the game. The game doesn't look, sound, or play anything at all like any of the home console versions. The only double-sided tape holding this and the home console versions of the game together is literally the story, and even that contains quite a few differences within it. So let's get into Pocket Puyo Puyo 4. Pocket Puyo 4 is built off of Pocket Puyo Sun's engine. Because of that, this version of the game retains a mechanic from the previous game, the Sun Puyo. Also, the one gameplay feature that is shared from the console version, the super attacks, have different effects and aren't restricted to a specific character. Similar to the console version, you can unlock the super attacks through playing the story mode, and just like the console version, you pick which one you want to use before the match begins. However, if you want to use the super attacks in all the side modes Pocket Puyo 4 has to offer, you must play this game's unique challenge mode. In challenge mode, you basically have to fight against a number of random opponents until you beat them. The objective is to get each character to a defeat rate of 100% in order to unlock their super attack in all side modes of the game. Also, if you beat the story mode, every character from the story mode will already have a default defeat rate of 60%. Carbuncle, Incubus, Minotauros, Ragnus the Brave, and Honeybee all appear in this mode too, and are available as playable characters. However, they're not in the story mode. They're not in the console versions either, aside from a few cameos. And speaking of characters not in the console version, we got some cameos in this game's opening cutscene, including Nasu Grave, Mummy, and Succubus. This opening cutscene though is the extent of their appearance. They don't appear in the game beyond that. Similar to the original game, you go through a basic line of enemies you have to fight like most Puyo games do. However, in Pocket Puyo 4, while that same line of enemies is presented to you, you don't actually have to fight all of them. The game will give you the choice of going through all the enemies, the second enemy, or just the boss of that section. It means that you can shorten the game from 17 battles to 9 if you want to. Finally, the only other thing I have to say about Pocket Puyo 4 without going into the story and gameplay, since I want to save that for when I talk about the original game, is that since Pocket Puyo 4 and Pocket Puyo Sun are both built from Pocket Puyo 2's engine, each respective game can connect to each other in order to play 2's rule set or Sun rule set battles, which is honestly really cool. And there you have it. With that, I should have covered most of the major differences between each version of the game, except for of course the story and gameplay. Puyo Puyo 4 is one of the most interesting Puyo games to me, and to many others because of the mystique behind it. It's not just the fact that the game is Japan only, since the game's story is probably one of the most known things about it. No, the way I see it, it really has a lot to do with what could have been. Puyo 4 is truly the Puyo games of what could have been. If you were to look into the development of Puyo 4 or just look at what Puyo 4 has to offer, you get quite a bit of information into underdeveloped ideas and ideas that were planned but just didn't make it. It's for that reason that I was pretty excited to play Puyo 4 for the first time, just to be given a taste of what this game has to offer and develop my own understanding and feelings towards the game. So after playing both the Dreamcast and Pocket versions of this game, it's time I present to you my thoughts and I guess review of Puyo Puyo 4. So right off the bat, the game opens up with this rather ominous cutscene. Dark forest, dark castle. Satan then finds a strange box with strange energy being contained inside. This game basically opens up with the big question of what is this box and what was inside of it. And while we do somewhat get answers as to what was inside the box, despite many popular headcanons, we also don't really know why Satan has the box to begin with. I'll get to the headcanon stuff later though, since the game itself doesn't really tell us what the deal with the box is. I mean look, Satan himself is clearly surprised this box is even here. This opening cutscene is quite the tone setter, it's very serious. And apparently the game was gonna have even more serious cutscenes but were cut to be more in line with what Puyo normally is. And with that being said, the next cutscene that follows immediately sets a much more happy tone. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. None of this serious mumbo jumbo crap. We out here having fun. Yeah, Arl, you cooked that lizard. Carbuncle out here taking a nap. We straight up frolicking and shit in here. And would you look at that? The circus is here! Yes sir! Look at all these friends! We putting on a show tonight, yes sir! Hey, who the fuck is that? Okay, that was strange. Oh well, we back to frolicking. If you couldn't tell, I love how fun this intro is. Anyways, on to the circus! Once we actually start up the story mode, we're introduced to this sort of storybook style, this cool looking frame around our screen as a narrator explains what's happening. Basically, Arl and Carbuncle decided to spend their day going to this new popular circus in town. And they're having a great time until the ringmaster, who looks suspiciously like Satan, decides to use him for the next trick. He claims that he'll make Carbuncle disappear, and he does. It's quite a great trick actually. So great that Arl doesn't even realize her friend is straight up missing now until after the show is done. So yeah, basically this game's story is Carbuncle is missing, and now Arl has to find him. But yeah, I feel as if the serious looking opening and more serious art style definitely gave people the wrong first impression when looking into this game from the outside. It's no more complex than any of the other Puyo stories that we've gotten in the past. Arl decides to go around asking troop members about Carbuncle's whereabouts. Misunderstandings ensue and they end up battling afterwards. Arl might get a small hint as to where Carbuncle is. That's basically the main rundown. Referring back to the idea of this game having more serious cutscenes, I am kind of curious on where people stand. On the one hand, I can see why people would be more interested in seeing a more serious take on the series. All the workings for a more serious plot are here after all. Unique lore to pull from other pre-existing games, a fantastical setting. They even went out of their way to change the series' art style for this specific game. On the other hand though, me personally, I'm perfectly content with what this game did. It's very obvious they had a lot planned for this game and more down the line too. If anything, I wouldn't expect Puyo 4 to be the grand Puyo game to ever Puyo, but instead more so act as a setup for things to come in a potential Puyo 5. I like Puyo 4's story, as simple as it may be, and I like that it got to be complemented with this beautiful art style, even if it probably wasn't fully utilized. Let's continue down the story though. After some more silly shenanigans happens, we run into our favorite dragon girl, Draco. They're pretty happy to see each other, and Draco even has a useful hint for Arl. However, Draco herself mistakenly assumes that this has something to do with a beauty contest, because of course she does, it's Draco, and decides to knock out the competition immediately by Puyo battling Arl. Obviously we beat her, and Draco still doesn't want to tell us which direction Carbuncle could be because she still thinks it's a beauty pageant and doesn't want Arl to go there. But ultimately she decides to act as our guide so that she can beat Arl once they get there. And when she does, the game announces that Draco has joined our party. That's right, Draco will be involved in the story for the rest of the game. Which is good for me because I really like Draco. And that also introduces us to this game's super attack mechanic. Now whenever we engage in a Puyo battle, we can use Draco's super attack. And since we're on the topic of gameplay, let's discuss it for a bit. From what I could find online, Puyo 4's gameplay has been criticized for one main thing. That's being its slower drop speed than the previous Puyo games. And it's not a subtle thing either, you feel it immediately as soon as you start playing the game. I legit thought my game was suffering from a slight bit of lag when I first started playing it, but then realized it was normal after I got used to it. The other main feature of the gameplay is the super attack. Each character has a super attack unique to them, and each effect can be viewed while selecting the character. And I have to say, I love these super attacks. Sure, future Puyo games will introduce their own mechanics that are similar in a way and in many ways superior to these, but I think there's both charm and merit to its simplicity. Most of the super attacks basically boil down to popping Puyos or getting rid of nuisance. In an evenly matched game, it's a mechanic where you can use it to get a shorthand advantage or guarantee your win. It adds a new level of suspense without going too crazy. So why did this game have a slower drop rate? I feel like with how fast Puyo gameplay can get, the addition of a super attack would only help heighten the tension. Supposedly the reason why the game has a slower drop was in order to spice up the gameplay. I feel as if the super attacks would have already accomplished this, but I kinda see where they're coming from. High level Puyo gameplay is pretty fast. Even moderate level Puyo gameplay is moderately fast. And the final levels in a Puyo story mode is sure to be fast. I think their intentions were more so to make a Puyo game that's easier to get into but still able to be enjoyed by already existing fans. As opposed to the console version, Pocket Puyo 4 has a much faster automatic drop rate, simply because of the fact that it was built off of Puyo Sun's engine, and to be honest, I like it a lot. I might even like it more than the original Puyo 4's gameplay. The normal speed you expect from a Puyo game is retained, the fun of super attacks is still here, and I don't mind the addition of the Sun Puyo. Even the super attacks, the one shared main feature of these games, don't act the same. Like I said earlier, they're not restricted to a single character and they have different effects. And I don't know if this was just me not knowing Japanese and having a random setting I didn't know about on, but it also seems as if the super attacks can be activated on their own. Correct me on that if I'm wrong, but if I am right, that's a difference too. All of this culminates into a game that ultimately isn't really Puyo 4. It looks like Puyo 4, it shares the same name, but it behaves on its own. If I had to describe it, Puyo 4 is like a beautiful swan, while Pocket Puyo 4 is a small little duck. They're similar, but they're different. So yeah, if you were wondering if there was even any point in checking out Pocket Puyo 4, I'd say absolutely, 100%. If only just for the gameplay. The gameplay is different enough that it can offer you a completely unique experience that the console version of Puyo 4 won't be able to. Anyways, if we want to get to the differences that Pocket Puyo 4 has with the story, we'll have to keep going down the main story. So Draco is on our team now. For the next following battles we can use her super, and it doesn't take long before we find our next party member. It's Saralee, who's in tears crying because she's just so adorable that everyone wants to eat her right up, or something like that. I like that this game decided to give her a bit of special attention. She doesn't really get any in the previous Puyo games. I really like Saralee. She's a bit ditzy and a bit pitiful too, but I think that's what makes her work in contrast to a character like Arl, who's kind and always ready and willing to help someone else, but also doesn't really take shit from people. That's exactly why after we battle her, Arl assures the terrified mermaid that we're not gonna eat her, and teaches her about trust, as well as declaring to be friends from now on. And for the first time in this whole interaction, Saralee is actually happy, and decides that she will help Arl find Carbuncle, cementing her as our next party member. Of course that means that we get access to her super attack too, and now the game will allow us to choose which super attack we want to use before every match. Next up, Sukatadora gets his heart broken by Saralee, and both me and Arl feel his pain. Harpy comes along and sings really badly and doesn't really help us in any way, but cool that she's here at least, I guess. After that, we meet the wicked witch named Witch, who currently is in the middle of doing a ritual. She doesn't really explain what it's for or what it does, but it turns out our party members happen to be prime ingredients for the ritual, so disregarding all life and giving us some very suggestive looks, immediately instigates a Puyo battle between her and Arl. After we beat her, Arl starts scolding her and she doesn't really care and just ignores her completely. But it turns out that the ingredient she needs most of all is the Carbuncle Grime Claw, and it turns out Witch actually did see Carbuncle a bit ago, so upon hearing that, Arl demands she leads them into his direction, meaning Witch is now in our party. And she immediately starts causing mischief by pissing off a dragon who has a really cool super attack animation, by the way. It doesn't even have an effect on our board, but it still depicts him blasting our side with fire, cause fuck it, that shit's cool as fuck. After we beat the dragon, Arl and Witch are arguing until they stumble upon a sanctuary being guarded by this character named Chico. Arl asks if she's seen Carbuncle, and based on the description she gives her, she assumes that Arl and the others must be here to steal sanctuary treasures. And honestly, that's probably true for Witch. She's been trying to take shit since the second she got here. Anyways, we end up battling, of course. After realizing Arl isn't a bad person, she decided to help her out by acting as a guide through the sanctuary, effectively joining our party. And that's basically the extent of her importance in this game. Besides one extra scene, Chico doesn't really do much after this. I know Puyo stories aren't that complex, and even the characters that we have right now haven't done much besides follow through on their character quirks. But I only say this to emphasize how Chico might have been a more important character in the future, or even in this game had compiled follow through on some of their ideas, or not have gone bankrupt. Chico is special because this is the first game she's in. She was made specifically for this game, and she wasn't borrowed from or used later in a Maru game. And she was even used as promotional material by Compile. Before this game released, Compile published what is known as Chico's Diary in their Disk Station magazine. It's basically 12 diary entries where Chico wrote some of her daily life events accompanied by a piece of artwork. A transcript of her diary entries are available online if you'd like to check them out. I just think that it's kind of a shame that this character never really got a chance to do much. Compile clearly put care into creating her and even making a small story for her and everything. And I don't dislike her at all, I just wish there would have been more time to see her more. It doesn't help that she's one of the last characters we see in this game. Maybe if she for some reason were to have been helping Arl from the very beginning, her character would have left more of an impact, but it is what it is at this point. Following immediately after, Shezo pulls up despite there being a barrier in the sanctuary because Chico left the back door open. That one's not an exaggeration of what happened like in the other descriptions I've given, that's literally what happened. Pervert jokes ensue, we beat Shezo, and we kinda just leave him there? Like literally, Shezo asks why they're just ignoring him and we just keep going. Like, why did we even fight him to begin with? I thought we were gonna kick him out for being an intruder and a weirdo. What a guardian you are. Anyways, we pull up back at the circus somehow. It's not really explained, just roll with it. But Rulu is here now, and she just straight up hates Arl in most instances, so without needing any explanation, she just straight up fights us. Speaking of which, Rulu might have my favorite super attack in the game. Seeing her rapidly punch all over the screen combined with the sound effect and seeing the entire board flip is really cool. Anyways, after beating her, she doesn't really pay attention to any of the people in front of her. She just straight up says Carbuncle is in the tent. And in her mind, she alludes to the fact that there's something wrong with Satan, and she places her confidence in Arl, hoping that she can somehow fix whatever it is. And that's kind of what I like about Rulu as a rival in this game. More so than Shezo and Draco, she's kind of like what you'd expect a true rival to be. Draco's rivalry is one-sided. Her and Arl butt heads sometimes, but at this point they're basically friends. Shezo is always fighting Arl, but that's due to his admiration towards her power, with Arl not really caring to instigate anything with him most of the times unless she thinks he's doing something bad. With Rulu on the other hand though, it's only specifically when it comes to wanting to prove her superiority and being more worthy of Satan's admiration that she can turn into a pretty wicked woman. It's sort of one-sided like Draco, but to a more intense degree. And here it's shown that even though she doesn't approve of Arl having Satan's interest, she's too respectable of a person that she's willing to put her trust in her, even if it's frustrating she couldn't do anything to help herself. Anyways, all of the characters get excited and ready and are willing to go inside the tent. Draco for the beauty pageant that she for some reason still thinks there is, Witch for the Carbuncle Claw, Cyrilie is just trying to follow her friends, and Chico asks why she's even still here, which is the realest thing she has said all game. Once we finally enter the tent, it's none other than... At this point, it seems as if it's just another plan conducted by Satan, but we had that opening cutscene that basically says otherwise, which points out that the carbuncle on his shoulder is a fake, and Chico says Satan is acting like a marionette. Satan doesn't really care about what they're saying right now, he only seems to care about two things, and that's keeping Carbuncle and challenging Arl. Not wanting her to get any outside help, he freezes all of them, which means that in this quote-unquote final fight, we lose access to this game's main mechanic, the super attack. Satan, however, gets to keep his super attack, so basically, he's a cheating bastard! Nah, but for real, let me express my thoughts on this real quick. A lot of video games do this thing where they'll give you a mechanic that pretty much becomes a core feature of the game, and once it's time to present a final challenge, they usually go one of either two ways. They craft a level where you have to use that mechanic to its absolute fullest in order to be able to pull through, or they take it away from you completely, forcing you into somewhat of a state of helplessness. The feeling of no longer having this mechanic that has helped you all throughout the game being gone, and it's almost as if the game is telling you you have to use nothing but pure raw skill to win. And Puyo 4 seems to have taken the latter approach, which I don't really think is the right decision for this specific Puyo game at least. For one, Satan's super attack is not so complex that it's not something that can't be played around. Additionally, the AI doesn't really understand that if it wanted to, it could just use the super attack if it felt like it at any time I'm in a disadvantageous position. It really only ever uses it when the AI itself believes it's in a bad spot. This game's drop rate also came to bite itself in the end. Satan's speed is restricted, and therefore while he's busy trying to clear nuisance off his screen with his super, I'm already trying to make another chain and Satan isn't really fast enough to keep up with me. Lastly, it's the game's special board rules. In Satan's fight, the board wraps around horizontally, which means a Puyo in the last column will connect with a Puyo in the first column. And somehow that ended up screwing Satan over? In contrast, Pocket Puyo 4 does let you use your super attack, and the speed is as fast as you'd expect a normal Puyo final boss to be. It seems to be taking the initial approach I mentioned earlier. I'll be honest, Pocket Puyo 4 is probably the harder game of the two, because it's just the usual Puyo formula but with the super attack mechanic and the some Puyos added into the mix. It's far more chaotic, and that adds quite a lot more suspense in my opinion. That's just me though. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the gameplay at this point. If anyone watching this has played both versions, let me know what your thoughts are and if you disagree with me. I'm actually pretty curious. Like I said, I tried looking into reviews of this game, but all I really saw were reviews talking about this game's slower drop rate and how cool the concept of super attacks are, but I never got anything close to a more in-depth analysis of Puyo 4's gameplay, or even how it compared to Pocket Puyo 4. And honestly, I'd like to hear what others have to say about it. Like I said, the gameplay is the big thing that separates these two games, and it's one of the things that makes me believe that they're not the same game at all, just similar games with the same name. That being said, since we're nearing the end, let's go ahead and catch ourselves up with Pocket Puyo 4's story. All you need to know right now is that there are quite a lot of differences in this version in terms of sequence of events and how characters are portrayed. For instance, you actually end up running into Period, the clown person you see in this game's intro, and you actually have to battle them. They seem to be in the background of many of the early scenes in the game, and they're even the one who points Arl in the direction of searching for the Ringmaster. Satan is also his usual unserious self, not being all serious like the Satan we have over here. He even runs into Arl and is like, "No Arl, I can't have you ruining my plans yet," and teleports the tent away. Draco immediately wants to battle Arl, claiming to be in a beauty contest, and since Arl basically knows where Carbuncle is already, she's not necessarily looking for Carbuncle, but for the tent instead. Since super attacks aren't earned in the same way in this game, there's no need for a party system, which means that Draco doesn't follow her, neither does Cyrilie or Witch or Chico. I am actually very happy that they still kept the bit where Arl becomes friends with Cyrilie though. She's pretty sad no one came to listen to her song, and she asks Arl if she would come visit her again, and Arl says sure, let's play next time, and that makes me happy. Witch isn't up to anything, and she gets mad at Arl because she didn't understand her question about what a circus is. Because Witch isn't here, the whole bit of the girls accidentally waking the dragon isn't done. Instead, Arl just runs into him and they both just kinda growl at each other, which is pretty funny. Chico, instead of acting as a guardian, actually offers to help Arl, but only if she pays a fee. And I think you get the point by now. Pocket Puyo 4's story isn't like Puyo 4's story. I mean, all the characters are here, and the checkpoints they go down is the same, but as opposed to the console version, this is a solo Arl story. And I think that's probably why, to me, this version of the game is far more in line with what you'd expect from a traditional Puyo game. Sure, the actual Puyo 4 is more silly than it is serious, but Pocket Puyo 4 is on its own level. It has the cute art style, the characters act sillier, and the story is more gag-centric. Essentially, most of the events in the story are the same, but they're told in a sillier fashion. Overall, I do prefer Puyo 4's story over the Pocket version. I like that it's an adventure with friends and the focus on the characters other than just Arl, even if those moments may be brief. But what Pocket Puyo 4 has to offer is pretty good too. If you want to check out the full story, Precise Museum has uploaded a full translated version of Pocket Puyo 4 to their YouTube channel. Anyways, in the Pocket version of the game, Arl arrives at Satan. And because Arl has no allies with her this time, there are none for him to freeze. And instead of being serious and mysterious, he's the usual Satan you'd expect. And in silly Satan fashion, he says he'll give Carbuncle back if Arl marries him. And unlike the other game, this actually does seem like a usual Satan scheme. So now that we've been caught up with both versions of the game, it's time to see what's really going on. In the Pocket version, Satan alludes to someone who's been working behind the scenes and teleports her away to meet her final challenge. I really have to hand it to the console version though. Satan seems to break out of whatever trance he was in before, acting confused and pleading his innocence. The music is mysterious, which makes the air feel somewhat ominous. And then suddenly, a voice is heard from behind, which claims that Satan would not have remembered anything he has done. Period finally appears from the shadows. Arl is confused. After all, why would this person of all people want Carbuncle? It doesn't really matter. Her only choice is to defeat them and get Carbuncle back. And with that, the mysterious person says, "You cannot even imagine what it takes to defeat me," and finally reveals her true form. That's right, folks! We finally made it to Doppelganger Arl. Just like Satan, we can't use super attacks. Her fight contains every special rule that every previous board has had, which actually makes her a far better challenge than Satan was. However, it still suffers somewhat from the problems that I mentioned earlier, but not to the same extent. After we beat her, Arl wants to know what we're all thinking. Who are you? And she simply says, I'm Arl. I will never be anybody else. But I lost. After that, she proceeds to disappear, never to be seen again. Carbuncle finally appears, and Arl quickly forgets about whatever just happened and wonders how they'll get back home. In response, Carbuncle uses some strange magic from the jewel on his head and proceeds to teleport us into the credits scene, which is accompanied with a lot of cool looking illustrations of events that happen throughout the game. What a beautiful picture. They even invited Satan. How nice of them. Once the friends leave, Arl and Carbuncle go home and live happily ever after. I guess. Unless you're playing the PS1 version, you still got that curry mode to do. Chop chop. So as happy and comfy and cozy and warm those credit illustrations were, I feel as if I could simply just end it there. Arl found Carbuncle, spent some time with her friends, and went home. It's a pretty satisfying ending. However, I'd be ignoring the Arl-sized elephant sitting in the room. What the hell is your deal? We've reached what is essentially this video's final section and talking point, Doppelganger Arl. I remember in my Arl is Strange video, I got a few comments mentioning her. And to be honest, I did consider including her within that video, but I stopped myself. I was already pushing it by talking about Lilith, but now I was gonna talk about another Arl lookalike I also wasn't really familiar with, who also has something to do with her origins. I decided to just leave her on the table. It's not like I didn't take initiative to do research on her, but none of what I found out about her seemed substantial enough to make a full video or even just talk about her for a bit. To me, while there were a few interesting connections you can make between her and Arl, it wasn't enough to justify taking a look into just her. I knew if I wanted to discuss Doppelganger Arl, I would have to look into the entirety of Puyo 4. And what I found is that she's probably the weakest element of the game. She's not a pre-existing Puyo character, she exists just to be a malevolent force pulling the strings from behind the whole time. And the only interesting motive she is given is made so vague that it leaves you with more questions than it does answers. And I honestly can't help but feel bad about feeling this way, because it's obvious that Compile had so much more planned, not just for this game but for the series as a whole, as I've already said plenty of times. Maybe if they had gotten to make a Puyo Puyo 5, or if they had gotten to keep making Maru games, we could have gotten more of her. More of an explanation of what the deal with her was. But unfortunately, that's not the timeline we live in. So all we can really do now is look at what was given to us. And it's probably for that reason that headcanons have become so prevalent for this character. So given what this version of the game has given us, let's look at the other version of Puyo 4 and see what its ending has to offer us. Arl is teleported to another realm where she's met face to face with Period. Up to this point, Period has been acting very silly, but once she removes the mask, things become a bit more serious. Once again, Doppelganger claims that she is Arl, but she doesn't do the whole "I'm the real Arl" shtick. No, instead she claims that they're both Arl. However, unlike Puyo 4, this isn't really taken as seriously. Arl makes a joke about how Doppelganger must be copying her because she wants to be popular. To which Doppelganger says, "I won't just steal your popularity, I'll steal everything. Your car, your house, your pet, your wife, and your life." Again, this is keeping in line with this game's sillier tone. And Arl obviously doesn't agree to that, so they fight. Arl wins. After losing, Doppelganger says, "All I wanted to do was become Arl." To which Arl says, "You are you. No one can replace someone else." Doppelganger, upon hearing this, agrees to return Carbuncle and teleports her to where he was. After that, she says that her and Arl will meet again someday, but this time, she won't be Arl, she'll be herself. Arl is teleported back to the performance from the beginning of the game, where Satan finishes his magic trick, However, this time he makes Carbuncle reappear, and they are finally reunited at last. Just like the original, they go back home to eat curry to live happily ever after. And the credits roll. And now I have to hand it to this version. While the original game had better build-up, this one just straight up has a better ending. In this version, it's clear what Doppelganger Aurel is. While you can still make your theories and headcanons about her connection to Aurel, if you were just to look at it at face value, Doppelganger is Aurel simply a malevolent force who was jealous of the real Aurel, and in the end was taught a lesson to just be yourself. And I think that's pretty satisfactory. It's not as cool as what the original Doppelganger could potentially be, but at least it does give her a unique character with explained motives and an okay enough conclusion. It's still sad that she didn't come back, especially because she said she would, but I can only assume that for this version of Doppelganger Aurel, she did what she said she would, and went on to become her own person. Maybe a ringmaster of her own, who has her own circus, so awesome that it's even more popular than Aurel. I'd like to believe that. That's my Doppelganger Aurel headcanon now. But it doesn't really give us any hints towards the Aurel we have over here. And I probably shouldn't have expected it to either. After all, I spent so much time in this video essentially proving why the Pocket version of the game isn't really Puyo 4 and that it has its own identity. That this game, despite sharing the same name of Puyo 4, isn't Puyo 4. Hey, wait a second. That sounds a bit familiar. Holy crap, guys. Is Pocket Puyo 4 actually a metaphor for Pocket Puyo 4's version of Doppelganger Aurel? When you think about it, that would be pretty insane symbolism. Now, I don't think at all that's what they were going for, but I'm gonna choose to believe that from now on. Well, I guess it's about time we get into the most popular headcanon regarding her. The most popular and widely accepted headcanon is that Doppelganger Aurel is the real Aurel, and not just that, she is a piece of the original Aurel's soul who Satan was keeping. Supposedly, this Aurel is the OG Aurel from the Maru games, and Satan was only able to bring a piece of Aurel into this Puyo world that he created. That piece of Aurel is the Aurel we know now. That is why the other piece of Aurel wants to defeat and replace the current Aurel we have now, to reclaim her identity in this new world. Given the more serious tone in this version of the game and that there's really nothing to contradict this in the game, if you were to believe this story, I wouldn't blame you. In fact, if you want to believe this version of the story, that's perfectly fine. I won't be the one to stop you. My purpose in relaying this information is to put it out there, to let it be known that, hey, this is something that exists in regards to this series, and you can make with it what you will. Even if there are no contradictions with it in the story of Puyo 4, this is not what was intended for the story of Puyo 4. This theory slash headcanon originally comes from a blog post by Kenichi Ina. Now, my pronunciations by now, you've probably realized this shit, so if I said that wrong, I'm sorry. There's a lot of interesting stuff within this post, and you can read a translated version of it in the link below if you want. But it's important to note that he was the producer of the Pocket Puyo version of the game, and makes it very clear that he had no part in the console version of the games, even going as far as to say that he has no idea what was even in the box Satan opened at the beginning of the game. The story I just told you stems completely from what he envisioned the story of his version of Puyo 4 to be, which would be the Pocket version. It just so happens that due to the vagueness and inconclusive nature of Doppelganger Aurel's story compared to the Pocket version of the game, as well as the more serious tone, that this story would work better for the original version of the game compared to the Pocket version, which is probably why people chose to believe this for the original story of Puyo 4, and is why I won't stop you if you choose to believe this headcanon. Me personally though, as cool as the concept is, as awesome as it would be to be like, oh yeah, Aurel has some cruel and twisted counterpart, and what makes it more fucked up is that it's the OG Aurel, and she just wants what is rightfully hers. Unfortunately, that is not what is presented in the game, and therefore I just can't take it as such. And that's a shame. It's a huge shame. This was the last Puyo game compiled, developed aside from Puyo Box, which, remember how I said that game had extra content? Well, Doppelganger Arl appears as a fight in this game, though it's more of a cameo than it is an actual appearance. It just goes to show that Darl had serious potential of becoming a mainstay Puyo character, and could have gotten the story she deserved had Compile continued to be responsible for the Puyo series. And that brings me to my final thoughts on Doppelganger Arl. A lot of fans seem to be under the impression that she needs to come back or that she should come back, and I can see where they're coming from. Not only is she cool on a conceptual level, but given the inconclusive nature of her ending, it almost feels as if she deserves to come back. And while I do think it'd be cool for her to come back, I just don't think there'd be any reason for her to at this point. The truth is that Doppelganger Arl's existence is tied to Arl's existence. Not in the lore kind of way, but she exists as a villain to be the antithesis to Arl. That is because up to this point, this has been Arl's story. And there is no better villain in a story than a character who acts as the opposite version of another character. That is part of the reason why doppelganger type characters are so beloved by fans of their respective media. They serve as a twisted version of the main character we've come to learn and love. It gives an interesting viewpoint as to what they could be. And Doppelganger Arl could have easily played that role had they continued to use her character. However, Arl is no longer the series' main character. She's not the sole hero of these games. Sure, she is a main character, but she's not the main character like she used to be before. That is why, while I think it'd be cool if they were to bring her back, I don't have my hopes high in them doing so. The new writers have gone out of their way to craft new characters, create new worlds, and repurpose old ones to fit their vision of this new version of Puyo. And I'm fine with that. And even though it's probably better she be left in the past, I still think she's pretty cool. And I wouldn't mind seeing her return in the future in a mainline Puyo game, so long as they do it the right way. Don't make her a cameo or just have her for the sake of fan service. The only way I'd want her back is if she was finally made into a real character. If not, then rest in peace, Doppelganger Arl. You will continue to be missed. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about Puyo Puyo 4. I have my issues with it, but overall it was a really good time. Each version of the game offers something unique and interesting to look at. It has some of my favorite characterizations and interactions in the whole series. Its artwork is very cool, and I didn't mention it once before, but I like the music too. It's not my favorite that the series has to offer, but I enjoy that it has somewhat of a slower but still energetic feel to it. And the Pocket version of the game had a lot of great stuff to offer too. And I like how that version has Pocket Puyo Sun music in it, which I didn't mention before. Puyo 4 is such a fascinating game on the surface. It doesn't feel like it'd be your typical Puyo game, and you can tell in what areas it's trying to give you that feeling in. But its most surprising trait is how typical it does end up feeling. And in a way, that's such a Puyo thing to do. I like this game a lot, and if I had to give a rating to both games, probably 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, you can move that to a 7 or 8, it doesn't really matter. They're good games. At the end of the day, they're Puyo games with a few fun twists and a lot to dig into if you choose to. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Did you know I actually started this script quite a while ago, and it took me like a month to finish it, cause I have a full-time job now, and it's probably gonna take longer to edit and upload. I sure do hope I can get it out in a timely fashion. I sure do hope a whole year doesn't end up passing by since my last video. Surely not. Surely that wouldn't happen, right guys? Well, thanks for watching. Bye bye.